Hello, my name's Vicky Washay and welcome to A Wealthy Life. You might notice on this episode, if you're watching the videos, that I have a guest with me. And if you aren't watching the video, hello, Ross. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Vicky. Nice to see you again.
Thank you. So let me just introduce Ross a little. I doubt that I am going to get this right or do him justice, but Ross and I met probably 2014 at one of these property networking things. Heavens knows what he thought when he met me, but eventually he got in touch and we started having a conversation and we started working together because he wanted some help. But Ross already had properties. So I will leave him to fill that bit of the story in. We then worked together for, I don't know, many years. And Ross, in my opinion, transferred from a man that was saying, I'm missing my family, to, just before we started this podcast, a man who's now saying he's in control of his time and seeing more of his family. And that's what I'd like to get out of this conversation with Ross, is how he made that transition using property. So, Ross, do yourself more justice and give us an introduction.
Okay. Well, let me. I take to your point about I had a few properties before, and I think perhaps that's where I'll sort of start my journey. A very good friend of mine called Joe Miles got into property with me. He got into property in Cardiff University, where we were both at university. And he was getting into it. This would have been in the early 90s. And I could see the model at that point. And I always remember him telling me, look, I'm going to be, in 10 years, I'm going to be just sat on my backside, with a massive portfolio. And I kind of smiled and watched his sort of journey towards exactly that. And what I did when I left university was I headed down the corporate route. But I always had this property thing going on in my mind. And one of my big ambitions was to go to Latin America when I was in that world. And so I was applying for all these jobs in Latin America, in the late 90s. And I remember one of them I got rejected from, and it was to be a country manager of Cuba, which would have been a great gig, I think. But I was very annoyed that day, and I just walked out when I found out I hadn't got it, and said, right, tomorrow I'm going to go and buy a house. I'm going to take a day off. And I woke up that morning, walked down to the front door, and there was an estate agency one-pager of the flat that I then bought. So my point being is there's always a bit of fate in these things. I'm a big believer in all of that. And literally within 2 or 3 months, I bought the property. And then within 2 or 3 months, I then got offered a job to go to Argentina. So very quickly, I had gone from being rejected from a job to having 2 properties, one property, but essentially, an extra income when I was abroad. So that was the start of it, and it was in a good location in London that I knew very well, and I think I bought it at a good price. But has probably been the most important platform to my growth in property. And my business is called Catherine Properties Limited, based on that being our first ever property. So I then came back to the UK, and with my newly found wife from Argentina, Agustina, and within a few years we were talking about moving out of London. And again, thinking about property, I was very keen to hang on to that London property. Just the general long-term thinking about property. So I didn't. When we moved out to Reading, we bought a property that we didn't stretch ourselves too much, because I wanted to give myself enough on this other one to develop it. And so on the London property from Reading, I then did an extension that basically became a good sized 3-bedroom from a small 2-bedroom. That has been really important doing that, because I've ridden the kind of property price rise in all that sort of time in the last 20-25 years, and that's enabled me in part to take money out of that property to use for my future investments. And I then, over the next 5 years, I then started, I think it was 2012, I bought my first property, which was a one bedroom on the street that I live in. Keep it simple. Let's learn about the Reading market. Now, that time, Reading market was actually quite cheap, I would say, for somewhere so close to London.
Yeah.
But that was just as the Crossrail was being spoken about. So prices were sort of simmering up at that point. And so, yeah, one bedroom flat. Next year, I bought a two bedroom flat, just thinking let's graduate up. But I remember I was going to lots of property seminars, and I saw you on a few of them. I thought it was important to spend a bit of time before jumping and seeing who I'd want to work with or whatever. And I remember our first conversation, Vicky, in which the main thing I just said to you was, look, I want to get into property, but I'm an amateur, I'm realizing, and I want to become a professional. I just need a strategy. So we met, I think, within a few days of that, and I think you were keen at that point to sort of underline my reasons around it, and I think you've articulated them just now. But also, I think underlying what I liked about property, because it's like any job of sorts. You're at your best when you're passionate about something, and I think I've always been really passionate about the business model of property. Probably a bit less passionate about the whole maintenance and building side of it. But anyway, you and you got me focused. You got me using some, models on how to really value properties and really know the pennies. And I'm seeing that in my current job. The importance of really getting down to the last pound or penny on things. And I think those 2 years where we were working very closely together, Vicky, I think the strategy was right. Get into HMOs in Bracknell. And again, Bracknell was at a relatively cheap rate at that point, and I could see the model working, and they were relatively simple models to do. I would say, the houses just converted quite nicely into 5 or 6 bedroom properties, and I've had them ever since. And certainly from a yield perspective, they're very healthy. They're both double digit yielding properties. And I guess I stopped. The last one I bought was in 2016, and here we are in 2023. I would say there was one other property, which was the flat above my current. Well, it was a flat above where I used to live.
Yeah.
That having bought it, we then turned into our house. So that was the sort of full circle, I think, of stage one of let's have property, at the center of what we're doing. And I think my mind on property has shifted a little bit in that it was very much about a platform for risk, is how I took it at the beginning. Yes, you've spoken about how I wanted to eventually get out of the corporate world and do something else, whether that was property or whether it was something else. And it was always that platform. And I think in many ways I look at it now as property has served as a platform for the lifestyle that I want to live now. I think that's probably the key shift in how my mentality has gone. And I think around 2016 was when I then changed and started working for Groupon, and probably did spend far too many hours of my life commuting into London and spending too many hours in that position. But you know what? That was my choice, and I take responsibility for that. But
before you go any further, can I wind you back a bit? Because there are some little sentences in here that I think just need unpacking for the listener. So first off, you knew Joe back in the 90s. He got into property, you didn't. Why at that point were you, because you were both in university, so theoretically you're both on a sort of a semi-similar, landscape. He's gone property, you've gone corporate. Have you thought back to why that happened, how that happened?
I think Joe probably had it a lot clearer what that path would look like, and had a lot, probably more of that natural entrepreneurial, and I mean really real entrepreneurial kind of drive and focus, and wheeler dealer and just get it done today. And I'm probably a more considered person.
Okay.
I don't necessarily see myself as an entrepreneur, and I don't say that disparagingly, but I like the whole concept of working for yourself and just getting on with it and owning it,
Mm,
more than doing it for someone else.
yeah.
And I think it was probably a difference in speed of kind of entrepreneurship in that. And I think I probably wanted to, at that time, I saw, getting into working in London and working for business as probably the right thing to do. So I didn't really ever think of it in terms of running my own business. But I do remember just having that kind of smile on my face when talking about property.
Yeah.
So I think,
So that's
yeah,
interesting.
the
It's
speed factor.
he's seen property as a business, and he's already, before he's gone into it, got a clear plan that in 10 years he's just going to be sitting on his portfolio. So he's obviously done some other thinking, and maybe there are people he's spoken to. And you know that you like property, but know that you're not someone who wants to run their own business yet. And so maybe that's why that bit. But then it stayed with you all the way through. And the way you described the story was you bought a house out of revenge or in spite or something, in anger, which is not actually the right way to be doing it. But it must have been bubbling. Something was bubbling there.
Yeah.
Was there anything consciously bubbling before you? I mean, I know you went, oh, I didn't get that job, right, I'm going to go and buy a house tomorrow. And then, the universal circumstances or fate stepped in. But had you been bubbling like a few days before that? Was there something else, or was it literally that clear? Right, that's it, I've had enough.
Yeah, I think around that time I was in a house share with the three of us, and I think one of them was starting to look at houses, and we were sort of both starting to think about it a little bit, and so it was there. But I was thinking, okay, I'm trying to get to Latin America in one of these jobs, and it might come off, and I don't necessarily want to do I want to be burdened with that or whatever. And I think almost and I suppose this is throughout my career in many ways, there comes a point where you go, at some point, you've just got to be decisive about it.
Yeah.
And I think I wouldn't really describe it as spite in many ways. It was okay, I am grateful for the fact that this job is now clear that it's not coming to me. I'll live with that. But my reaction to that is, right, let's take action.
Yeah.
And I think that's the key thing in this, because suddenly everything seems to, channel in the right way when you take action. It doesn't mean you have to, as long as you're not stewing on something for months and months and months and not feeling good about it. I think it was the right time to take action. And I saw that very much as a positive thing.
It's interesting the way things sort of like line up, because when I look back, I think how many times, if property was a person and they could, how many times property came up and tapped me on the back of the shoulder. There was when my grandfather or grandmother my grandma died, my grandfather was left, my grandfather got ill, he got a big house on a big plot of land, and we left our house, which was like 6 doors down the road, and moved into his house to look after him. And then we sold that house. And now I'm thinking, God, we should have kept that house. We didn't need to sell that house. We still had this house. And then when we moved into this house and my granddad got ill, we had all of this space. I mean, I can't remember, but an acre or something. Why didn't we build houses? Now, my dad was a master tailor and very creative, but he wasn't a builder blokey. He was an inventor, which was the last thing we needed, building houses. But then a builder came along, bought the plot, turned the main big house into an HMO, but we didn't have the language for that. So people bought shared rooms or, rented shared rooms, and then built 3 houses either side of the property. And I drive past there thinking, darn, we could have had that as well. We could have had that one, we could have had this one. And then my parents became tenants. And so the first time we were tenants while they were waiting to buy the next house. Then they built the next house and they developed on it. So then they were developers. And it was all of these words that I now know as, buying and selling and HMOs and developing and tenants, and all of that language was there until then I finally got forced into it. And I bought a new build off plan, and it was like, I never even heard of those words, but that's what a wimpy home was in those days. And then eventually, like with you, with my journey, eventually I get all the way down the line, and that moment occurs, and I've thought about property, and I go to this event, and this man is talking about property, and I go, that's what we need to be doing. I need to get the money together to do this.
Yeah.
And at the time, I was, I think, at university with 2 children under 3 on benefits type of thing. And I knew that I wanted to get into property. And then all of a sudden, everything sort of came together and you go in that line. It's really interesting, isn't it?
Well, I think one of the things that's interesting about what you're talking about is almost sort of 40 years ago, whatever, whenever the mindset, of us all as a population or a generation was, I think, different. And I think particularly banks were different back then. And I think it was Simon Zucchi who had that story of, he had a house, and then he went to the bank manager and said, I want to buy this house and rent it. And the bank manager, oh, there's a risk.
Yes.
Well, actually, when you think about it, he's saying, I guarantee you 2 incomes.
Yes.
Yeah. So if I lose my job, I've got another income. So in fact, the risk factor in doing that should have been a positive thing for a bank.
Yes.
It
took them a long while to catch on, didn't it? Because even if you go back in history, the landlords, these were lords that had lands. We've changed the word around to call ourselves landlords, but they were lords of the land in the old days. And all this land was owned by one person, and they parceled it up and they rented it out to all their tenant farmers. I mean, the system has been there for generations and generations, but banks and lenders, as you said, really only sort of cottoned on to this, I think probably somewhere in the 2000s, early 2000s. I don't know the exact date. There's one other thing that you slipped in, and this was about how you started off with thinking that property was going to do one thing for you, and we'd had that whole conversation about why do you want to get into property, and then you've said now that you can see that property is this platform for the lifestyle that you want to live. Explain that bit a bit more.
So I think in my words to you in that thing, I said I'm an amateur, I want to become a professional. In retrospect, I think I wanted to be a professional small P, potentially big P as well. What I'm getting at is I wanted to make a bit more money out of this and take the long-term growth and all that side of things. But I think when I look back, what I mentioned there about I'm not huge into the whole kind of refurbishment and big costs and dealing with builders. That's where professional big P makes the difference between what I wanted to do. And then the lifestyle. So and I'm fine with that, by the way, as well, because this is an important investment, that I've got here in it, and that that's working for me and has been working for a while. But I think it's only now that I'm living that lifestyle that I'm actually seeing what I really wanted was the platform to have that. And I guess the step I've taken is a risk. I'm business in a different thing, and in very much in the infancy of learning how to make it a proper business, and we'll get there. But I think it's more a retrospective thing that I see. It was a platform for a lifestyle.
So
I suppose that platform it enabled me to make the move. It gave me a cushion of money, frankly, that while I moved from my last job into this one, I could rely on to get me through, and it's serving exactly that purpose.
So if I can say back to you what I saw during that period. So we met, you'd got some properties, you'd actually been very clever in that you had recognized never to sell what effectively is a cheap asset. And that's the title of one of the podcasts that I've done, Never Sell a Cheap Asset. And that you've held on to these properties. When the time has been right, you have allowed that property to pay for the expansion as you wanted to grow forward. But always because you've been very business aware of it, you've kept an eye on the cash flow, and it's been about generating a second source of income. Because when we met, you were in one corporate job, then you switched, as you said, to Groupon in your second corporate job. And I remember having a conversation with you going, I thought you said you wanted to give up the city life. And you said, oh, no, this job would be fine. And then we moved on a bit, and then the job just got busier and busier. And then you were chief of this and giant overseer of somewhere else. And, the job just grew and grew and grew. And your time became very constrained. And so it was about very much focusing on the systems, which again is that business approach to it. And yes, I don't
Well,
feel.
I'll just pause you there a second. You're right. It should have been about focusing on the systems in that period, but it wasn't. I actually lost control, I would say, during that period, because I was. Look, we all manage our own time, whether you're employed or self-employed, and I allowed my time in that last job to take over all of my time.
Yes.
I can tell you this actually, but on one occasion it took me, I think it was 20 months to do a remortgage. And this was all down to me forgetting to give this piece of paper to my mortgage advisor, and then I missed the periods that you've got to hand everything in by, so we had to start again. And yeah, I remember when the bank said to me, "Yeah, this is the longest one we've ever dealt with." That was down to me not being on top of those systems, I would say.
Yeah.
And
maybe our calls
this
not
last
being
18 months, I've been all over them.
Yes.
And it really makes a difference.
Yes. But that's because we're not having our calls anymore, you see, because I'd have been nagging you on that.
You would have.
But then you've got to this stage where you've got this additional source of income coming in through the properties, and you're ready to take that step out of the corporate world. And then you've not gone for something little, of course. You've taken on a giant franchise, and yes, you've got some business partners and everything else. But I think the thing that's different here is, even if we said the number of hours, and I don't think this is true, but just check me, that if the number of hours you spent in Groupon equaled the number of hours that you're spending working on the franchise, and I think that it's probably slightly less than the franchise, the difference is that you're choosing the hours when you put them in, how you put them in, and the fact that you are putting them in to the franchise, and that is your choice. And that's the massive difference here. You've broken the link between, and I think I've always said it, I mean, it was one of the things that we did, one of those modules that when we used to do all the meetings together, about breaking that link between working to pay the bills and now working because it's a choice in whatever way you want that work to manifest. You're still working. I mean, you're a young guy. I can't imagine you just sitting at home with, a couple of properties here, a couple of HMOs down the road, and just sitting around doing nothing. You're always going to do something, but now it's of your making, and every hour that you choose to put in, you can see a direct benefit to your family, rather than it was a cost before.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely it was. That's the biggest, so much value. And do you remember when we first, you got me to do all my expenses and stuff, what I could live off?
Yeah.
Well, I think the reality of that world, in the corporate world, I was, a good stage in my career, was at a reasonably good level and all that kind of stuff, and earning the kind of money that I could generally do most things. We weren't doing loads of holidays a year, but enough to go, okay, if you want to go out to a meal for tonight, let's do that. Not even think about it. Pop into this shop, buy it. And actually, at the beginning of this exercise, we're actually about 4 months into this new venture, when I realized, okay, I need to get on top of the costs of this. I did that exercise. Agostina and I, we sat down and we went through all of our costs and said, right, until we're in a better state,
this is what we're going to focus on.
Stop doing this. And I have to say, within about a week, the two of us looked at us, we're so happy. You realize all those little 20 quid here, 25 there, £8.50 here, 90, they weren't necessarily making you happy. And in so many ways, I was very grateful for, having some of the challenges we've had in the first year of running a business, and whether you're due to have those challenges or not, I think it's a really good exercise for anyone at various times in their life to be really checking in on those costs and whether you really need to be spending on X, Y, and Z.
It's interesting. I still, to this day, and since 2010, I've made everybody I work with do that exercise, and I do that exercise. I've got my receipts sitting here waiting to be entered, right? Because unless you're conscious about your spending, it's just giving the money away to somebody else, and you're trading your time for the money in the first place, and then you're just giving it to somebody else so they can be rich. And every single person I ask to do that, who does do it, has an epiphany about their relationship with money. And so many people are resistant to it. Well, but I earn over 50,000, I earn over 100,000, I've got plenty of money, I don't need to do that. Yeah, but do you know how much money you just need, how much is the basics? You know, I used to talk about having enough, having more than enough and much more than enough. How much is enough? If we had to scale it all the way back, how much is enough? And once you know that number and know that you earn that, double that, triple that, doesn't really matter, you can go, oh, I know where I stand. And it's just, it flips the switch, doesn't it? And like you say, then going, oh, crikey, and I've been spending 20, 30, 40 quid a week on X, and that doesn't make me happy. Why was I giving all my money to that person then?
It's funny. An example of that, Vicky, is I no longer buy Costa or Starbucks or any of that stuff unless I'm going to meet someone. But you know, when I'm on my own, just grabbing a coffee, because I associate it actually a lot with my first few months in this sort of latest job, where I was just being a bit casual about it. I have a coffee, you know, 2 or 3 times a week, and I've stopped it, and I don't intend to start it again because it doesn't really taste that good anyway after time. But it's you know, it all adds up. It all adds up.
You stand outside a station, any station, anywhere in the country, and people are queued up outside these coffee shops, either on their way to work or even worse, you're about to go to home where you've got a kettle and a mug, and you still buy a coffee for the journey home. And I remember doing an exercise, and I'm pretty sure it's in one of the books, where there's an exercise that says if you take a penny every day and you double it, it doesn't take long until you've got £1 million, because 1 becomes 2, 2 becomes 4, 4 becomes 8, etc. And then you do it the other way around, and you go, well, okay, if I take a coffee as a lost opportunity, and I don't even bother to necessarily double them all, and I remember in the book it was £2.80, and I think just recently we stopped off on the way to the north, and we stopped at one of the stations down the road, and I think it was close to 4 quid or 5 quid for a coffee. I think it was just under £4.90 or something, and it's like it's gone up so much. But that £5, and there was 2 of us, so that's £10. If you did that every day, that's your 50 quid a week. If you did that, you know, every month, that's 200 quid on coffee that you could have brought in a flask. You could have bought an £8 flask and made it at home and brought it with you, and then refilled it at work and brought it back again if you wanted. But it's then seen as, oh yeah, but somehow is that mean, or is that what poor people do, or that's limiting myself? But it's not, is it? It's not. It's about not wasting money on stuff that doesn't give you joy, so that you can have the time to spend on the things that do give you joy, and then choose to spend your money on the things that give you joy.
Completely. It's that's absolutely right, Vicky.
So look, we've probably gone over time already. We're going to have another talk. Would you mind coming back on the show again?
Very happy to. Yeah,
awesome. Well, look, let me just round this off and then say, because we briefly mentioned HMOs, but I don't think we've gone into it in enough detail to do detailed HMO stories. But 3 tips for someone who's thinking about investing in property. It's a bit on the spot there, sorry, Ross.
I think no. So the first one is get a great team around you. You know, whether that's your conveyancer, whether that's your estate agents, whether that is you know, someone who's giving you a coach like yourself, whether that's your cleaners, etc. Because the collective power of other people working really well at the expertise that they have, which you probably don't have, is powerful, really powerful. And I see that in my current business as well, but that's the details. That's for another side. I think the other thing to remember is, so the second point is the importance of getting the right price at the beginning. You know, this is property is I'm going to call it a slow game. It's a long game. That's probably the thing. And, you know, on your point about the compound, you know, impact there, you know, if you can buy a property for 150,000, not 170,000, you know, and that 20,000 difference as opposed to your coffee cup, you know, one, that's huge. And if you do that on every property, now I think it's easy for me to say that where you get that difference, that ability to get a difference, is with experience and good people around you who give you that inside knowledge as buy a property in that part of town, or yeah, this guy's really desperate to sell, or
Yeah.
whatever it else might be. Or, you know what, actually in this one, I don't mind doing all this work, or I can see, you know, if I build an extra room here or extension there, I'll be able to get more out of it. And I think the third one sort of extends from that, I think, is in the HMO model particularly, and even though I've not necessarily done this with my two HMOs, I think the real win is finding those properties that you can extend or build an extra room or two on and refinance on the back of it. Because I think there's two things. One, again, the compound impact, the compound effect of investing 80,000 in a refurbishment that adds 150 to 200,000 onto a property is fantastic. Two, the enablement to reuse your cash, and the third point, it really is a follow-on to that, is it's not always easy to find cash, and I think I certainly had difficulties in that. But once you're in the cycle of generating and regenerating cash, your ability to then go through the gears in property is immense, and not many people have that.
I think that's a great place to stop. We're going to carry this conversation on. Ross, I just want to thank you so much for your time. Thank you for being a guest on the podcast. It's been super seeing you and listening to your story again. To all of you who've been listening, thank you very much. My name's Vicky Washay. This is A Wealthy Life, and I hope together Ross and I have been able to put a little bit of whoosh into your property thoughts, and we will speak to you again soon. Thank you very much for listening.